The end of one life, Sersi, is the beginning of another.
Yes, we're going to talk about this movie. Not because I went and saw it in theaters, because obviously this video is coming out quite a while after it was in theaters. We're going to watch this movie because it came out on Disney Plus, and I got so bored one day that I thought, let's see what the hullabaloo is about this. And I'm not alone in my assessment of my critiques of this film, although I will say that I am probably a bit harsher than a lot of the industry has been, if you can believe it. For those of you who don't know anything about this movie, it's important to understand something. And what you need to understand is that this film has been the subject of controversy pretty much since it began. And that's not any fault of the viewers, really. Eternals itself isn't a horrible idea. The original comics were entertaining enough, had enough source material. There was a lot of places that they could have gone for this film. Here's the problem. They decided to pretty much take a dump on almost every single thing that they tried. Now, there are going to be spoilers in this review as always, but I'm not going to break down the entire plot. You can go ahead and watch a movie review that does that elsewhere, or a series breakdown, a movie breakdown. You can go ahead and watch that elsewhere. I'm here to talk about the problem with this movie. And the problem here is misidentified by pretty much every single critic that you'll see that watches the movie, because all of them have an agenda behind it besides why it is that the story actually works or doesn't work. Just to go ahead and give you an example of what it is that I'm talking about, if you go ahead and you look on Rotten Tomatoes, which I typically don't trust their score, but there's something that's interesting here. The actual critics rate it 48%, which is a Rotten Tomato for them. The audience score gives it a 78%. Now, originally what happened is, before the movie had even come out, lots of people, lots of users, were giving this movie a ton of bad scores. They were downvoting it, they were saying all these different things about it, some of them credible, some of them uncredible, and just review bombing the movie, which is something that happens to pretty much every single blockbuster now, unless it's Dune, because Dune's amazing. And the critics were the ones that were originally defending it, because they were saying you have to give the movie a chance and everything, and then at the very end of it, it turns out the audience ended up enjoying it more as casual viewers on Disney Plus than the people who were critics that wrote for Rotten Tomatoes. And it didn't fare that much better on IMDb. On IMDb, it earned a score of 6.6, which is not a great movie. It's not horrifying, but it's not a great movie. And Metacritic gave it a Metascore of 52, which is not a great movie either. And again, here, the users generally enjoyed it more than the critics did. And it's interesting to me, because a lot of people don't seem to understand why it is that Eternals failed so badly. And they want to point to things that you would find to be the typical suspects in a movie, and while there are a lot of them present, a lot of political and social agendas that may or may not be irritating to you depending on where it is that you stand, that's not inherently the problem with this movie. That's not the reason why the movie doesn't work. It's not the reason that the story completely falls on its face. Let's go ahead and go through some of those things though. One of the problems that people had with the movie, for some reason, was them adding Makari, who is an actress who is deaf, playing a character who is deaf, into the movie. I don't understand why some people had a problem with it. A lot of people said that it was a problem somehow to add in a character into the movie who isn't actually acting as someone that's deaf. It's kind of the thing that you heard about Bryan Cranston, right? Where it's somebody who's playing someone with a handicap and that person isn't actually handicapped themselves. I think that's a stupid line of argument, but I also think Makari, the actress isn't even bad. We just don't see Makari for most of the film. She's really not there. And at the end of the day, she doesn't really matter to the story at all. And there's only 3 characters that even really matter, and we'll talk about them later, but just know she's barely in it, and she doesn't really matter. So it doesn't matter at all. Another problem that people had was Ajak, and a lot of you may think, oh, what was wrong with Ajak? Well, on the left-hand side, you'll see there's a character there. That person is Ajak. Now on the right side, you'll see also Ajak. This is a problem that a lot of people had because they considered it some sort of reverse whitewashing of a character. Here's my problem. It's not that the character itself was changed, because you can change the makeup of a character if there's reasons to do so. My problem is there's nothing really wrong with the original Ajak. and creating a character that's a woman to play Ajax, who's a character that's male in the comics, there's not really a reason to do so, which makes me ask why it is that you made the change in the first place. Because if there's a reason to do so, and there's an aspect of the character that's going to be explored and moved into that's like couldn't be captured in any other way, sure, I don't mind that. I think that there are roles that people can play that allow them to explore the character in a way that you wouldn't be able to if some other person played the character. It's why it's acting. My issue is that there's not really anything that's brought out of Ajax. Again, she's not really in the film that much. So I don't understand what you were doing besides reverse whitewashing the character. So, did you just do that so that you could put a woman in the role? Because if that's the case, that's not even a problem with the actress. The actress did her job. That's just Disney being retarded as usual. Then there came the really big one where a lot of people found out that Phastos, who is one of the Eternals, is gay. And for a lot of people, right, people who are more traditional in values, they would have a problem with the fact that there's an openly gay character and there's openly gay kissing in the movie and things like that. I don't have a problem inherently with that, right? I think, again, my problem is that Disney is apparently under the impression that there's never been a gay character in any series ever, and so they shoehorn this in, not because it makes sense for the character or because it fits into the character story or that it confirms things about the character from the comic book that people wanted answered, but so that Disney can say that they had a gay character. That's the only reason that Disney did it. Disney doesn't actually take pride in doing anything new or different, which, I mean, you could probably tell because all they do is remake all their old stuff and remake all these comics. They've never actually created an original story in the last 10 or 15 years. They haven't really done anything. But that's not the problem with Phastos. The problem with Phastos is actually that the reason that Phastos originally, again, spoilers, leaves the Eternals is because the bombs that were dropped by the United States on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. He apparently contributed in some way to their design, whether that be that he made it for the US government or that he assisted man in creating weapons like that and then they created the atomic bombs. It's a narrative from a certain side of the cultural and political aisle, specifically in the United States, that regards that as a mistake. Here's the problem. I don't care what side of the political aisle that you're on. Invading Japan, which was the alternative to dropping the bombs, invading Japan would have cost anywhere from 1 to 4 million US casualties and anywhere from 5 to 10 million Japanese casualties by all available estimates. Nagasaki and Hiroshima, in fact, let me just look this up right now, roughly 70 to 135,000 people died from the Hiroshima bomb, and 60 to 80,000 people died in Nagasaki, both from immediate, obviously, exposure to the bomb, and from the long-term effects of the radiation that affected them in that bombing. Now, while we will all agree that that's tragic, and it's horrifying, this is war, and it's a horrifying and tragic thing that occurs, we're going to pretend that that number somehow equals the, at minimum, 5 million, 6 million people that would have died had the US attempted an invasion of Japan. We're going to ignore that. And this is my problem with Phastos, is that Phastos' internal logic doesn't even work when he applies it himself. It doesn't make any sense, because the entire point where the Eternals basically split up in the first place, the entire point of when they originally split up is during the Spanish conquest of Central and South America. That's when this occurs. And Phastos doesn't really have a problem with the mass imperialization, colonization, and genocide of a lot of those people. He doesn't. This doesn't affect him in that way. Even though he's watching people get murdered in front of him, he doesn't have an inherent problem with it. But then when it comes to this, which is Nagasaki and Hiroshima, which was the alternative to repeating on a much larger scale what happened in Central and South America at the hands of Spanish conquests, we're supposed to pretend now that Phastos is too stupid to understand that this is the merciful, at the time, alternative to the actual invasion, which would have taken a lot longer and would have caused a lot more extensive damage to the people. And we're supposed to pretend like Phastos doesn't get that, like Phastos doesn't understand that. The problem is that the movie wants you to presume that Phastos is super intelligent while also making him so stupid he doesn't even follow his own logic. That's the problem, is that the movie doesn't respect the viewer enough to make the character consistent, and they want the character to behave the way that they want the character to behave based on the situation in order to make the story more convenient and palatable moving forward. But it falls apart the second that you put any basic scrutiny on the character itself. But moving past a lot of the superficial issues like that, whether it be the LGBTQ representation of characters within the movie, whether it be the reverse whitewashing that apparently occurred, whether it be the insertion of characters with apparent handicaps into the story, removing all the superficial issues, this right here is the reason that the movie doesn't work. You see, something that's really fundamental to the aspect of storytelling is that the individual whom you display as the protagonist, as the hero, or depending on what you're doing, the anti-hero, they need to be a character that the audience can in some way, on some level, agree with and relate to. That's the way that it has to work. Even when it comes to an anti-hero, let's say Deadpool, things happen to Deadpool, unjust things, that make him the way that he is. And while he doesn't always make good decisions, you at least relate to him on some level, and you root for him. And it's the same thing when it comes to any other kind of movie. When it comes to any other kind of story in any medium, you need to be able to root for the protagonist. Even if they're not the strongest, they need to be somebody that you can aspire to morally or aspire to physically. There needs to be an aspect of that where you watch them learn and you watch them grow, and they adapt qualities that you enjoy and or respect. That has to be part of the growth of a character. When it comes to this movie, what they attempt to do is they attempt to make Sersi the main point of focus. They try and make her the good guy. They try to make her the protagonist. And it doesn't work because there's no real growth that occurs at all at any point in the movie. Literally, her character's journey is she's the sweet, kind one, and she exists that way throughout the entire, I guess, history of the Eternals. And then Ajax dies, and Sersi is given the ability to communicate with the main antagonist, who reveals the entire thing to her. And then Sersi is the exact same and does the exact same thing, so she's just naturally good. Well, now we're just doing the Superman thing, where there's nothing wrong with Sersi and there's nothing to criticize, but she doesn't even have that because she doesn't have all the powers, all the physical strength that you would expect someone who's that morally correct to have. There's no progression. There's nothing to look up to. There's nothing to respect. There's just a paragon of moral virtue that's just not wrong for some reason. And what the movie wants is for you to be on the side of Sersi and stopping Arishem from going through this process wherein Arishem will create a planet. On that planet, Arishem will put life, and life will flourish on that planet, but also become fuel so that it can create a celestial, and a celestial is able to go and create more planets, basically furthering life in the universe as we know it. So if you're a moral relativist, then morality is relative to everyone, and so I guess there's Sersi's point of view and you can root for Team Human to live, but you can't inherently call Arishem evil because you're a moral relativist, and so you don't believe in the objective definition of evil. You would just qualify everything evil that you don't like. That would be the moral relativist view. If you're not a moral relativist and you believe that there's a creation theory of some kind, and that there is objective morality in the universe, Arishem created the universe, operates within that framework. Arishem, objectively, is order, and truth, and reality, and is correct. So, we're supposed to side with Sersi being like, no, Team Human, even though I'm not human, but Team Human. And we're supposed to side with her against Arishem, who's essentially God in this story, and is doing something that's been done everywhere else, and the only reason Sersi doesn't like it is because she's gotten attached to her boyfriend. That's what the entire story hinges on. Now you are starting to understand why I think that it's so weak. And it gets even harder to root for Sersi when it comes to Ikarus, because Ikarus is actually a really interesting character. One of the only interesting characters in the entire movie. There are characters that I haven't even talked about, haven't even mentioned, whether it be Sprite or Gilgamesh, a ton of other people that have their one-liners because it's a Marvel movie, but really don't matter. Ikarus is actually interesting because Ikarus actually has an understanding of what's about to happen. He has an understanding all along about the complexities and the intricacies of Arisham's plan. Because he has an understanding of these things, he has an understanding that eventually everybody here is going to die. And this is the purpose for which he was sent here. And so he's loyal to that purpose. And then one by one, he sees his team starting to apostatize from Arisham's mission that he sent them there for, and that they had executed many times before, to further the universe. And there are billions of lives at stake that still need to come into existence, that Arisham's trying to put into existence, and a couple billion people here on Earth versus the trillions and trillions and trillions that will come after are what he's weighing with that knowledge. And then as he sees these people start to apostatize and start to go against Arisham and try to stop this plan, he has inner conflict, but decides to fulfill his duty as he understands it in order to protect the plan that he was sent there for by a creator who knows infinitely more than he does, versus Eternals who are making decisions with limited understanding and context. And we're supposed to view Ikarus as the bad guy because he betrays them as if they weren't the ones who were already betraying Arisham. And we're supposed to root against him for Sersi, who isn't a great character, because she's good. And he's not good, because he didn't fall away from Arisham like the rest of them did. And he takes trillions versus billions, which is the same math, by the way, that like Phastos couldn't do earlier, apparently. And he can't see the greater good, and not just the greater good, right? Because I know that's such a cliche term, but we're supposed to look at him as though he's evil. When in reality, if anything, Ikarus is a conflicted anti-hero, and everyone else on Team Eternal is a traitor going against, however you want to put it, either just another entity that's much more intelligent and much more established than they are, and has a lot more power and control, or you take the aspect of hierarchy and order, not chaos, and Arisham's correct because Arisham created the universe, which creates the framework within which they live, and they're trying to tell Arisham that she's wrong. Do you see what the problem is here with this movie? The problem is the director thought that she was really intelligent in putting together this story in which they rebel against God. Right? This really is a kind of a backhand against kind of a Christian worldview, right? Which it doesn't, like, it's not like it's the first time that Hollywood's tried it, right? And there are times that it's more successful than others, but it doesn't work because the internal logic of the story doesn't even make any sense. I'll be honest, I watched the movie and I was rooting for Ikarus pretty much the whole time. I knew that there was going to be a twist because the movie was way too streamlined and it was way too Boy Scout, middle of the road, and there wasn't enough stuff going on. And so I knew there was going to be something else. And so it made it so that Ikarus's betrayal wasn't a huge shock. It was just something that happened. And it was hard to fault Ikarus for attempting to stop them from stopping Arisham. And then Arisham comes and takes Sersi away. And I'm supposed to be, I don't know, sad or something. And I just come away from it thinking, man, Ikarus was a good guy. Really sad that he died. And I have a really hard time rooting for Team Eternal. I think that's what people are missing, is that they think that there's all these there's this social noise going on with the movie and that somehow, like, it's supposed to be important. It's not. The main reason that the movie doesn't work is because the movie doesn't even believe the things the movie tells you. The movie tries to tell you that Makari is amazing, right? Which is already amazing because she's an Eternal, but then they have to add that she's deaf, which is interesting that that would happen because Arisham created a deaf Eternal, which you would think would be odd, right? Since she's a superhuman, that he's going to remove that? I don't know. With everything that goes on in the movie, the movie doesn't believe its own core internal logic. And the only internal logic that does make sense, that Arishem is the master creator, has been doing this for a long time, has knowledge and understanding and context outside of what the Eternals understand, and they rebel against Arishem anyway in order to force her to come to Earth personally to take care of it. The idea that that's supposed to in any way make us fans of the Eternals doesn't make any sense. And that's the problem. This is the problem with the Eternals. The movie takes itself too seriously, but doesn't even believe what it tells the audience, and then expects the audience to ignore it and or just believe everything they say in any given moment. This is the problem with Marvel movies in general, is that Marvel movies have an entertaining storyline, but it has no internal logic and makes no sense, so any actual thought put into the movie, any actual thought put into the story, and most Marvel movies collapse like a deck of cards. They just do. And so, at the end of the day, bright lights, fairly good CGI, although there were some interesting misses on that front. And the characters, I mean, like, they fit a lot of their roles well outside of the, obvious ones that I've mentioned earlier, but the story just kind of sucks big time. And really outside of that, there's not much to say about it. I mean, Harry Styles is in the movie, which is kind of weird. I don't know, it's the whole thing's just this bag of kind of irritating, not because the movie's horrible, but because the movie doesn't even believe what the movie's telling you. And not that every single movie needs to be a serious experience, but if the movie doesn't even respect the audience enough to play by its own rules, why should the audience respect it enough to not make comments about how the movie doesn't make any sense? I don't know. Food for thought. I know a lot of people will disagree with me on that. I know that there are a lot of people in specific communities that are going to say that this is an amazing movie. At the end of the day, I'm sorry, it's a subpar Marvel movie, which there have been a lot more of those lately, and I really don't know what to tell you. It's at maximum for me a 5 out of 10, just because the movie doesn't make any sense. And if you don't like it, that's fine. You can also have your own preference on the movie, but the internal logic of the story doesn't make any sense, and that's why it doesn't work. And that right there is the problem with the Eternals.